What if your mind is not busy by accident, but because it was trained to never stop? Think about this for a moment. Not one specific thought, not one situation, but a constant flow, a background noise, a sense that something is always happening inside your head, even when nothing is happening outside. Have you ever noticed that? You sit down to rest. There's no problem to solve, no urgency, no demand. And still, your mind keeps going, jumping from one thought to another, revisiting things, imagining possibilities, anticipating scenarios, almost as if silence itself becomes uncomfortable. Now this raises an important question. Why does the mind stay active, even when there is nothing to respond to? If thinking is supposed to be functional, why does it continue without a clear purpose? Here's where things start to shift. Because the mind is not just reacting to the present, it is constantly predicting. There's a model in neuroscience called predictive processing. According to this model, your brain is not waiting for reality to happen. It is actively trying to anticipate it. It builds expectations, simulates outcomes, prepares responses in advance, and this process does not stop, even when there is no immediate demand. Now think about the consequence of that. If your brain is always trying to predict, it needs data, it needs scenarios, it needs possibilities. So it generates them, thought after thought, sequence after sequence. And that creates something very specific, not a loop, but a stream, a continuous production of mental content. Now here's something even more interesting. Did you know that the brain has a network specifically active when you are doing nothing? It's called the default mode network, and despite the name, it is not inactive, it is highly active. This network is involved in self-reflection, future planning, memory recall, social simulation, which means when you stop doing something externally, your brain starts doing something internally. Now imagine that system being highly active, sensitive, well-trained. It doesn't just activate, it stays active. And that creates the feeling of a busy mind. Not because something is wrong, but because something is always running. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to clear your mind and noticed that it becomes even more active? That's not failure, that's amplification. Because the moment you try to stop thinking, the brain starts monitoring thoughts, and monitoring requires activity. So instead of silence, you get more movement. Now we begin to understand something crucial. A busy mind is not just about thinking too much. It's about a system that doesn't switch off. And that brings us to a deeper layer. Because what keeps this system running is not just habit, it's regulation, and that's where things become even more interesting. Now consider this. Your brain is not only designed to think, it is designed to keep you safe. And safety, for the brain, is not the absence of danger. It is the continuous monitoring of potential risk. This creates something called baseline vigilance, a background level of alertness that remains active, even when everything seems calm. Now imagine combining that with predictive processing. The brain is scanning, predicting, evaluating, all the time, even in moments that should feel restful. And this generates something subtle, but constant, a sense that something might happen, not necessarily something bad, but something uncertain. And uncertainty is something the brain tries to reduce. So what does it do? It thinks, it simulates, it anticipates, it prepares. Now here's an important point. A busy mind is often not reacting to reality, it is reacting to possibility. Scenarios that haven't happened, conversations that may never occur, outcomes that are not real, and yet, they activate the system. Now let's go deeper. There is a concept called allostatic load. This refers to the cumulative cost of keeping the system active for too long. The more the brain stays in prediction plus vigilance mode, the more energy it consumes. But here's the paradox. Even when the system is tired, it doesn't stop, because stopping requires safety. And if the system is not fully convinced that everything is safe, it keeps going. Now, this creates something very specific. A mind that is both tired and active, exhausted, but unable to rest. Does that sound familiar? Now there's another layer. Have you ever heard of cognitive inertia? Inertia is the tendency of something to keep moving once it has started. The same applies to mental activity. If your mind has been active for hours, days, or even years, it develops momentum, and that momentum keeps it going, even when there is no reason to continue. Now combine that with habit, because thinking is not just a process. It can become a pattern, a default behavior, something the brain does automatically, and over time, this becomes your baseline state, not calm, not silent, but active. Now here's something important. Many people try to fix a busy mind by forcing relaxation, but the system does not respond to force. It responds to signals, signals of safety, signals of completion, signals that it can finally slow down. And if those signals are not present, the activity continues. Now you start to see something deeper. A busy mind is not the problem. It is a signal that the system is still trying to regulate something. And that leads us to an even more important question. What exactly is the brain trying to regulate, and why does it choose thinking as the tool? To understand this, we need to look at thinking in a different way, not as a problem, but as a strategy, because in many cases, thinking is how the brain tries to create control. Control over uncertainty, control over outcomes, control over internal states. Now imagine a system that does not feel fully safe, not necessarily in danger, but not completely at ease either. That system will try to stabilize itself, and one of the fastest ways to do that is through cognition. Thinking creates structure, it creates a sense of direction, it creates the illusion of control, even if nothing is actually changing. Now here's something subtle. A busy mind often feels like chaos, but internally, it is an attempt at order. The brain is organizing possibilities, testing scenarios, trying to reduce unpredictability. Now ask yourself this: when your mind is most active, what is happening around you? Is it after a stressful day? Before an important decision? During silence? At night? These patterns are not random. They reveal when your system is trying to stabilize itself. Now there's another concept that helps explain this: cognitive load accumulation. Throughout the day, you process information, make decisions, interpret situations, suppress reactions, adjust behavior, and all of this consumes mental resources. But not everything is processed in real time. Some of it stays pending, and when the external demands decrease, the internal processing begins. That's why your mind becomes active at night or in silence. Not because something is wrong, but because something is unfinished. Now connect this with what we saw before: open loops, unresolved patterns, pending processing. The brain uses thinking to try to close these gaps. But here's the issue: not everything can be closed through thinking. Some things require rest, some require emotional integration, some require time. And when the brain tries to solve everything through thought, it overloads itself. Now the system becomes saturated, but instead of stopping, it accelerates. Because it interprets overload as urgency, and urgency increases activity. Now you have a mind that feels busy all the time, not because it wants to, but because it doesn't know how to disengage. And this leads to a final layer, one that changes everything. There is a moment where you start to see this differently. The mind is not busy because it is broken. It is busy because it was never taught how to stop. Think about that. From early on, you were trained to think, to solve, to anticipate, to respond, to be prepared, but rarely to disengage, to allow stillness, to trust that nothing needs to be done. Now this creates a very specific pattern. Action mode becomes dominant. Recovery mode becomes unfamiliar. And when recovery is unfamiliar, the system avoids it, even if it needs it. Now you understand something fundamental. A busy mind is not just about thoughts. It is about imbalance between action and recovery, between prediction and presence, between control and trust. And when this balance is not restored, the activity continues. Now here's the shift. You don't need to eliminate thinking. You need to create conditions where thinking is no longer necessary, where the system feels safe enough to slow down, where not thinking does not feel like risk, because for many people, silence feels like exposure, stillness feels like vulnerability, and that's why the mind fills the space. Now let me ask you something. What happens when there is no loop, no specific thought, and still, the mind keeps going? What if the real question is not, how do I stop thinking? But, why does my system feel the need to keep thinking? That question changes everything, because it shifts the focus from control to understanding. And from understanding comes something deeper, not silence forced, but silence allowed. Now, if this made sense to you, I want to hear from you. What part of this changed the way you see your mind? Was it the idea of predictive processing, the concept of baseline vigilance, the realization that thinking can be a strategy, or the understanding that a busy mind is trying to regulate something? Write it in the comments, even if it's just one sentence, because sometimes clarity begins the moment you can name what you're experiencing, and when you put it into words, you don't just understand it, you begin to step outside of it. And if you want to go deeper into this, there is a sequence of videos on this channel that explores overthinking, mental fatigue, repetitive thoughts, and how the brain tries to stay in control. Start with the playlist on your screen, because this is not just one video, it's a map of how your mind works.